By the 1950s, Barbara Stanwyck had become the most bankable woman in westerns. She made more of them than almost any other major actress of her era. Some were quick B-pictures, others full Technicolor epics. A few nearly ended her career, and a few stand among the best westerns ever made. Here's every Barbara Stanwyck Western. Let's see which one really deserves to be called the best. This is Stanwyck as Sierra Nevada Jones, a tough Texas rancher who moves up to Montana to claim family land. Outlaws show up, her father ends up dead, and she's left fighting for survival, though she gets some unexpected help from a friendly Blackfoot man. Ronald Reagan is along for the ride as a secret agent. Behind the scenes, things got a little tense. Reagan wrote to friends complaining about the producers and feeling left out. He called it a shoot from hell and said Stanwyck pretty much stuck with her own crew the whole time. Critics didn't see anything special here. Most called it a slow, formulaic Western, with the New York Times summing it up as listless and ordinary. Stanwyck, they said, looked pretty as a Western sunset, but didn't have much to do except chase after the bad guys. Reagan's heroics were called stalwart and obvious. Still, there's Technicolor scenery and Stanwyck doing most of her own stunts, including a scene where she swims in an actual icy lake. If you look close, you'll spot a Cattle Queen poster in Back to the Future. It's one of those little Reagan gags. Here's a strange one, black and white but shot in 3D. Stanwyck reunites with Fred MacMurray from Double Indemnity. But instead of noir, you get a Western that doesn't really know what to do with its big gimmick. MacMurray plays Wes Anderson, a cattle thief who escapes a lynching and heads back home for revenge. Stanwyck is Rella, his old flame, who's now with Wes's straight-arrow brother. After a bank robbery goes sideways and the brother ends up dead, Rella goes after Wes herself, but by the end he's ready to turn himself in, and she, maybe, will wait for him. The whole thing runs just 78 minutes, but still manages to fit in an intermission, purely for the 3D process. Critics at the time and since have called it odd and gimmicky, that 3D isn't used for anything except marketing. For Stanwyck, it was a real return to Westerns after the Furies. The pairing of Stanwyck and MacMurray got people in the door, but the script is clunky, the dialogue is pretty rough, and it just doesn't spark like their earlier work. But you do get a rare look at Stanwyck in 3D, so that counts, I guess. By 1956, Republic Pictures, the king of the B-Western, was winding down, but they still managed to make a splash with this one. Stanwyck is Kit Banyan, a flashy saloon owner who secretly works with Butch Cassidy's gang. There's an undercover Pinkerton detective, Barry Sullivan, sneaking around, and naturally a love triangle forms with a younger woman in the mix. There's a standard mix of train heists, double crosses, and shootouts. Kit turns on her outlaw partners and helps the lawman when things go sideways. If the plot feels familiar, that's because it's classic Western formula, adapted from a Zane Grey novel, one of Stanwyck's favorites. But you get Stanwyck, then 49, playing a gun-toting queen pin with real conviction, and the Rocky Mountain locations look great. This was Republic's first try at widescreen Naturama, so it's got the big scenic views. Critics didn't call it a masterpiece, but they did give Stanwyck credit for a fiery, commanding performance. Paramount went big with this one. Lavish Technicolor, big cast, and plenty of wide shots of the West. The story covers the whole sweep of the gold rush and statehood, from the first wagon train out of Missouri to the backroom political fights in California. Stanwyck is Lily Bishop, a gambler kicked out of town who ends up joining a wagon train. It's led by Ray Milland's cynical ex-soldier Jonathan Trumbo. The two don't get along at first, but as the caravan pushes toward California and the gold rush hits, alliances shift. Lily finds herself tangled up with a corrupt aristocrat trying to stop statehood. There are fights, gold, political schemes, and Lily eventually shoots the main villain to save Trumbo. California looks great even now, half a century later. Oscar-winning cinematographer Ray Renahan gives it that big, shiny Western feel, and a lot of it was filmed on location in Sedona, Arizona. Critics liked the visuals, but felt the story was overstuffed. Wagon train drama, gold rush chaos, and a lot of statehood politics jammed into one movie. The pacing gets choppy, and there are more than a few singing pioneers montages. Still, Stanwyck brings real spark to the bad good woman Lily, and the scale of the production is impressive. Some scenes even run 4 minutes or more in a single take, unusual for a Western of this era. This was Stanwyck's first Western, and her first time playing a real-life legend, Annie Oakley. A poor Ohio girl with incredible aim rises to become one of the most famous sharpshooters in history. Stanwyck plays Annie with a lot of tomboy energy. She defeats Toby Walker in a shooting match but lets him win at the end so he doesn't lose face. Buffalo Bill brings them both into his Wild West show, and the film follows their travels, their slow-burn romance, and Annie's fame growing as she performs before royalty and celebrities. Stanwyck throws herself into the part. She learned to handle horses and guns for real, and you can see that confidence on screen. The movie takes plenty of liberties with the facts, but it's lively, colorful, and gets most things right. The New York Times at the time called Stanwyck splendid and said this was her most striking performance in a long time. Director George Stevens goes for the full star-crossed lovers angle, so it's a bit melodramatic, but Stanwyck keeps it grounded. Barbara Stanwyck and Joel McCrea worked together 6 times, more than with any other co-star. The Great Man's Lady isn't the highlight of their partnership, but it's still worth a look. This is a romantic frontier story that jumps through decades. Stanwyck plays Hannah Simpler, starting as a rebellious teenager and ending up a 100-year-old pioneer, all told in flashback. She falls for Ethan Hoyt, McCrea's character, and runs off to the West, determined to help him build a city from scratch. At the time, some critics saw The Great Man's Lady as a little too melodramatic. Washington Star called it semi-listless, saved only by Stanwyck's energy. The makeup work is impressive, though. She really does age convincingly on screen, all the way to 100. This was one of Stanwyck's favorite roles. She put in long hours in the makeup chair, determined to pull off the transformation. Director William Wellman, known as Wild Bill, made sure the pioneer scenes had weight. There's a flood scene done with full-scale practical effects, and the story never shies away from tragedy. Stanwyck and McCrea had real chemistry, on and off screen. McCrea once said in an interview that Stanwyck was his favorite co-star, always professional and generous with the cast. He also said The Great Man's Lady was really her movie, through and through. Trooper Hook is one of those westerns that never made a big splash at the time, but it stands out for taking on tougher subjects. Joel McCrea plays Sergeant Hook, sent to rescue Cora, Barbara Stanwyck's character, who's been held captive for years by Apache Chief. She comes back with a young son who's the child of the Apache Chief. The film tracks Hook as he brings Cora and her boy across hostile territory back to her white husband. All the way, Cora faces open prejudice from everyone around her. The story builds toward a standoff with Apache Chief, who escapes custody and comes after them. The script never lets you forget the racism of the era or the dangers Cora faces just for surviving. At the time, Trooper Hook was seen as a modest B-Western, but critics today see it as quietly powerful. Stanwyck and McCrea, by this point both veterans, bring real depth. She's fierce, he's compassionate, and they never make it feel simple. This was their last film together, and that long partnership shows on screen. The cinematography stands out too. Those Utah landscapes, even in black and white, feel almost epic, and the stagecoach scenes are up there with John Ford's best. The Violent Men is a classic ranch war western, but it's Barbara Stanwyck who makes it special. Glenn Ford plays John Parrish. He's a Civil War vet just looking to sell his ranch and move on, but he gets dragged into a war with Lou Wilkeson. He's a ruthless, wheelchair-bound cattle baron played by Edward Robinson. Stanwyck is Martha Wilkeson, Lou's wife, and she's as dangerous as any gunfighter, scheming, icy, and carrying on an affair with Lou's brother. The action builds fast, land grabs, shootouts, betrayals, and Martha is always in the middle, pulling strings and pushing men to do her dirty work. At one point, she goads her lover into trying to kill her own husband. It's polished but familiar, a better-than-average psychological Western with great action and strong visuals. What really sticks is Stanwyck's performance as Martha. She's a villain, no question, but there's something magnetic about her. Martha Wilkeson was actually one of Stanwyck's favorite bad girl roles. By the time the studio stopped giving her lead roles in big pictures, Stanwyck didn't slow down. She pivoted to westerns where she could play tough women, sometimes outlaws, sometimes ranch bosses, always in charge. 40 Guns is the highlight of that run. Directed by Sam Fuller, this one casts Stanwyck as Jessica Drummond, who rules Cochise County with her own private army of 40 hired guns. Jessica's younger brother Brocky causes problems, and a U.S. Marshal named Griff, played by Barry Sullivan, shows up to restore order. Jessica and Griff clash, then connect. She even saves his life in a wild tornado scene. But things don't end happy. Brocky's violence escalates, and tragedy follows. When it first came out, the movie wasn't a huge hit, but critics now call it a Sam Fuller masterpiece, maybe the boldest Western of its era. Stanwyck's dedication is legendary here. She did her own stunt getting dragged by that horse, no double. Sam Fuller later said she was fearless, just let that horse drag her through the dirt and nailed it in one take. Union Pacific is Cecil DeMille's last black and white film. Stanwyck plays Molly, the tough Irish-American mail clerk who keeps the railroad camp running while the Union Pacific line is built. Joel McCrea is the railroad troubleshooter trying to keep the trains moving. Robert Preston is the rival, secretly sabotaging the railroad, and both men are in love with Molly. This is classic Hollywood spectacle. Train wrecks, battles with Sioux warriors, and the driving of the Golden Spike. The production was massive. For the world premiere in Omaha, 250,000 people turned out. The National Guard kept order, and President Roosevelt signaled the event by telegraph from the White House. Union Pacific was a big hit in 1939, the same year as Stagecoach. They often call it Hollywood's best year. The film helped elevate the Western from B-movie fare to major studio prestige, and it was praised for its scale and action. Union Pacific even opened the 1939 Cannes Film Festival before it was canceled for the war and later received a retroactive Palme d'Or. It also earned an Oscar nomination for Best Special Effects. The Furies is the overlooked classic of Stanwyck's Western run, directed by Anthony Mann, who's best known for his string of Westerns with James Stewart. This one is something different, a Western noir with a real bite. The story is all about the battle between a ruthless cattle baron and his stubborn daughter. Walter Huston, in his final film, plays the father, trying to keep his ranch afloat. Stanwyck is his daughter, locked in a bitter, almost Shakespearean feud, especially after her father brings home a new fiancée. The film bombed for Paramount when it came out, but time has been kind to it. The Criterion Collection calls it an overlooked treasure of American cinema, and some have compared it to King Lear or Dostoevsky's The Idiot. Anthony Mann, looking back near the end of his life, admitted he had mixed feelings about The Furies. He said the film had marvelous characters, interesting notices, but it failed because nobody in it cared about anything. They were all rudderless, rootless, and haters.